My skin still crawls, thinking about the sky. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during my first week of grad school and decided I was his mark. I had just moved to my new college town. I didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the one my folks paid for during undergrad behind. I was grown and could take care of myself. I rule. What a nitwit I was. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed this truck pull up behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't too many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized the guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. I was in a relationship, so I ignored him. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights, he would end up ahead of me. Some behind or beside. At every light, he positioned himself so he could stare at me either directly or in one of his mirrors. His gaze was unwavering, and my anxiety rose. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple of times. Finally, at a red light where he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I was met with an unbelievably empty, unwavering stare and realized he was fiddling with himself. He was getting off on the fact that I was terrified and he was following me and he was trying to force me to pull over. At one point, I scooted through an intersection on a hard yellow, a couple of cars ahead of him, thinking I could shake him. Nope. He went around the cars at the light and ran the red and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I hoped to lose him, but he drove his truck down the embankment to keep following. Another light where he was beside me. I pulled through the light and then turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red to follow me. My panic really ramped up at that point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction in a new city, I really didn't know what to do. So I turned on classic rock and forced myself to sing along and force myself to go to the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of terrified stupidity. I decided to drive to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of the lot as soon as he saw all the cop cruisers parked up front. I filed a report and asked for a police escort home. I insisted because something told me that this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. He was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me, and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cop couldn't catch him. The police got their surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dogging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw him on surveillance footage following me through the store. I saw him follow me out, close enough to grab my elbow. I saw footage of him circling the lot in his truck, waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. My heart sank. I was able to remember 6 of 7 digits of his plate and the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said, she said, since the surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particularly unlawful and was a losing case to try to charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with a friend for a couple of months to try to feel safer and went on with my life. I had no idea what this monster had done just a handful of months later, until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about the kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell off my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Sheen. It was him. I was so disgusted that law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case, and after verifying some things about the vehicle that were changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making stuff up, she took my contact info and official statement. She could neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Shen, but qualified her statement by saying at least you don't have to worry about him anymore because he got life without parole. I only wish something could have been done when he terrorized me. Perhaps things would have been different for Sandy. So my part of the story starts in 2009, and I was a junior in high school. I lived in a small town in Ohio. In the fall, I started dating my first real boyfriend, John. John was a senior, and many of his friends were dating my friends, and he's well-liked and funny at school. I'm thrilled about the relationship, especially because my strict parents seem to like John as well. He's pretty quiet around them, but always polite and appreciative in their presence. Since it's a small town, John lived literally down the streets, and we hung out all the time. My parents were actually getting divorced at the time, so I liked spending time at his place more than mine. John lived with Chris, a man who wasn't his biological dad, but someone he had lived with since around age 13 and often called Dad. Chris was an adolescent counselor who knew John because he had been in foster care and he had taken John in. Chris was an amazing human who was fun to be around, and it was just the two of them, and their pug Murphy at the house. I didn't know much about John's childhood at first, other than it had clearly been rough enough for him to be involved with children's services. Anyway, we spent a lot of time together and always had a good time with Chris as well. Eventually, John confided in me that he often had thoughts about ending his own life. I was shook by this, and I told Chris about it as well. We continued to date, and I did my best to support him. So the next year, I'm a senior, and John has graduated, and he's not really doing anything. He didn't go to college, and his plans to join the military weren't really working out. So he's just living with Chris and working a part-time job that my dad had gotten for him. I've always been into school and extracurriculars, and I felt like John was kind of holding me back. Our relationship was going downhill in many ways, but I was scared if I broke it off with John, he might actually go through with ending his own life. He had threatened to do so when I tried. In May 2011, I graduated high school and decided I had to leave the relationship behind. I was having my own depression issues, and John was having a detrimental effect on my mental health. I finally told him we had to break up, and he needed to stop contacting me, threatening to self-harm. I mostly cut off contact, and a couple of months later I got an apartment with a friend about 30 minutes away from home and beside the college that I was attending. On Friday night in April 2012, I'm in my hometown to see a friend, and I pass John's house where I see police cars everywhere. I'm shocked, and I assume that John must have gone through with it. So I immediately call our mutual friend Kyle. Kyle has no clue what's going on with John, and he says that John had hung out at his house the day before. Kyle said John seemed like he was in a good mood, especially because he was driving Chris's Beamer at the time, which he loved to do. Anyways, Kyle is actually chilling in my apartment with my roommate. This was normal, as he had a crush on her, so I just keep driving that way. When I get to my place, Kyle hasn't heard anything, but my mom calls me with a scoop. She's friends with the cops' wives. Small town stuff. It turns out that John murdered Chris and was on the run somewhere. Someone had called for a wellness check after not hearing from Chris for a while, and the cops found his body at home. I was shocked and a little scared, as were Kyle and my roommate, so we all decided to stay at my roommate's parents' house for the night. By morning, the cops had luckily found and arrested John. He had taken the Beamer, so it was easily spotted at a rundown motel about 15 miles from his home, about 12 miles from our apartment. When the details came out, the whole thing was even more horrifying. It was a brutal homicide, and it had occurred days before the body was found, which means that John was just hanging out at Kyle's house between committing this act and getting arrested, just nonchalantly playing video games, telling jokes to Kyle's little sister, acting like everything was fine. In the meanwhile, he had stuffed Chris's body in their freezer at home. It's insane to think about how someone could be such a psychopath, and there was really no explanation given. John initially tried to plead insanity, but he was eventually deemed competent and then pleaded guilty. He got 30 to life in prison. I've obviously told this story from my perspective, but the person who really matters in this is, of course, the victim. Chris was truly a saint of a human being. He had been my role model for so many years. And you just wonder, how could something so horrific happen to someone so good, and at the hands of someone they had given everything to, someone they had loved, trusted, and then seen as a son? It's horrifying. Chris spent his life advocating for kids like John, and the local center he worked at is actually named after him now, as is the street that it is on. As I said to begin, I often wonder about the why of it all. Chris and John got along almost all of the time, and though John clearly had mental issues, no one thought that he would hurt anyone but himself. But clearly something was very wrong with John that we missed. They say hindsight, and I can definitely look back and think of a few strange instances with John. Sneaky, manipulative, and angry. He eventually showed all of those traits. But I was lucky enough not to experience any violence at his hands. I wish I could say the same for Chris. I'm thankful for the time I did spend with him and the positive impact he had on my life during that time. I know he had a positive effect on so many other lives as well, and maybe the only one. This is my first post, and although this happened back in December 2019, I still think about it on a daily basis because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I hope it offers some sort of enlightenment on what to do, not to do, if you find yourself in a similar situation. Back in early December, I had ventured out to do a bit of late-night shopping. I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home mother of 2 young children, so once my husband got home from work, I like to take some time to myself and go shopping, take a drive, or run errands, kid-free. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I arrived at the Target that I frequent. I'm by no means a paranoid or anxious individual, but I have attended several seminars in college on human trafficking and have done plenty of research on my own, learning to identify red flags and what precautions to take when out in public alone, especially at night. I carry several self-defense items on my person at all times, a Cubiton, alarm, and universal handcuff key, just in case. I parked directly in front of the store next to a cart caddy and took a mental note of the vehicles parked nearby again, just as precaution. I was taught at an early age to always be observant of your surroundings, and being a control freak just naturally makes you that way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that night, and the parking lot was actually quite empty, most likely because it was a weekday. As I entered the store, I began browsing like usual, following the natural flow of the store departments, following the main aisle around. I had been browsing for only 15 minutes when I noticed a young gentleman, mid-20s maybe. He was tall, skinny, dressed in a dirty gray 2-piece sweatsuit and brown work boots. He looked over at me, smiled, and said hello, but his facial expression was blank. He looked like he may have been high on something by the look in his eyes, but he didn't seem to care for my gesture, and he quickly moved on. At first glance, there was nothing in particular that alarmed me about him, except I took notice at the fact that he was just wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket, hands in his pockets, and didn't seem to be with anyone. I continued shopping with no second thoughts and made my way to the next department. Several minutes had passed, and that's when I noticed a second young gentleman wearing the same gray suit and similar pair of work boots. Again, no cart, no basket. He too glanced at me, then quickly darted his eyes away when he realized I was looking directly at him. I became a bit more alerted, but still remained composed and continued on browsing. Another 15 minutes or so passed, and that's when a third older man caught my attention, and you guessed it. Same gray suit and work boots with no cart, no basket, just his hands in his pockets. I assumed they were in some sort of work uniform, maybe construction workers, but when weren't they walking around together, and why didn't they have any items to purchase? At this point, it was difficult to focus on browsing. I had a bad feeling about these three men, and it became clear that something was a bit off. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I felt as if, though I was being monitored by the three of them, as if they were all communicating my whereabouts as I continued to make my way through the store, because each department I entered, it didn't take long for me to notice one of the three men pass by whatever side aisle happened to be in, making their presence known to me. I stayed completely vigilant while trying not to panic or allow my suspicions to overwhelm me. Something about their presence felt very heavy and dark, so I decided to test their intentions to prove I wasn't overthinking the situation and my bad gut feeling was valid. I began picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between departments in a very unorganized and random fashion to see if the men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been. With every aisle I popped into was just a few minutes later one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed by. It felt as if though I was being surrounded like a wild animal, hunted even. They were no longer trying to be inconspicuous, which was the scariest part of it all, and everything instinctual was screaming at me to get out of there. I gripped my cart so tightly, and I figured if they got too close, I could use the cart to push them away, or at least create distance between us. By this point, I had been shopping for about an hour altogether, maybe a bit over, and was ready to purchase my items, but honestly, I felt too uncomfortable to continue browsing, even if I wanted to. The man had been following me all that time, and I was becoming more annoyed, if anything. The store was pretty empty around this time. One of the main reasons I liked shopping at night, but that made this particular situation even more unsettling. Two pre-teen girls were wandering around by themselves, which quickly caught my attention because the men had bypassed them, making similar advances. But the girls were seemingly oblivious. So I quietly got their attention and asked them to go find their parents and stay with them, trying not to freak them out. The mother in me was on full protection mode. I couldn't imagine having my young children with me on this night. Thank God they were home safe and sound. As I made my way to the checkout, I noticed one of the men coming up from behind me, walking at a quicker pace this time. So I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with them as he approached. I will never forget the darkness in his eyes. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he nudged my shoulder, continuing to stare me down, walking backwards to hold his sinister gaze as he exited out of the store. I had lost sight of the other two men, and I hated the uncertainty of it all. He made his message clear in that very moment. My stomach dropped, and my entire body began to shake, and it was a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a kid getting lost in the supermarket, a feeling of desperation. I quickly walked to the checkout, discreetly asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager, and told them what had transpired over the last hour, politely asking them for a male employee to walk me to my car and for them to alert their security team members. When I told the manager what happened, her face sunk as if she'd already known about these men, and once I described them, she confirmed she knew who I was talking about. She expressed that several of the female employees had found the men unsettling in the past and assured me that someone would escort me to my car. She made a report about the incident and said that she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking but felt relieved that she believed me and showed concern for the other young female patrons in the store. She took my information, then a young male employee walked me out to my car. What I saw as I exited the store made me so sick to my stomach, solidifying all of my suspicions. A white windowless van was parked in the lot directly behind my car, about a 3 parking space distance between us. One of the men seated in the driver's seat and the other 2 leaning against the side of the van facing my car, attempting to hide out of view. I mean, how cliché and obvious can you be? Your license plate might as well have read Lady Snatchers at that point. Whatever their intent, it didn't seem pure. I pointed them out to the male employee and said, "There they are," which then prompted the men to scurry into their van and speed out of the parking lot without hesitation. I truly don't know what would have happened if I walked out to my car alone, and I'm so freaking grateful I made it home safe and sound and lived to tell the story. Over the following week, I'd heard that there were several abduction attempts in the shopping center parallel to that target, and I'm almost certain it was the same individuals. This happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago. But I think about it often and have changed the way I operate throughout life. Now I refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. For the story's sake, I will tell you that I was 25 and an attractive, slender blonde at the time. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager, and he had noticed that we were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to go to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends that would require to get us through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked of me without trouble at the store until I got to the liquor aisle. There were 2 country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me feel uncomfortable, as I assumed that they were making comments about me. All pretty innocent so far. Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed very quickly and power walked to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you're on a stage and are required to be charming and interact with people that you would otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you're getting paid. Thus, why I'm not a bartender anymore. I get to the self-checkout and hodl my tale of the 2 guys. I'm scanning my stuff and they use the scanning station next to me. I get a better look at them now that they are right next to me. One is taller, muscular, and average looking. The other is shorter and more plump. They both looked dirty, and their eyes were completely bloodshot, not sure if they were high on something or already had been drinking for a while. They continued to stare at me, and our eyes awkwardly met, so I did the pleasant Midwesterny thing to do and flashed them a quick, half-closed lip smile to be polite. The taller one started trying to talk to me. "Hey, looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I replied with something like, "Yeah, something like that. It's not for me, though." They walked closer to me and ignored their responsibility to scan their items. I flashed that awkward, tight-lipped smile again and rolled my eye slightly like, "This is your hint that I'm not interested, fellas." The taller one continues to try to talk to me. "You could come hang out with us tonight? We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean." I reply with, "No thanks. I'm good. I got plans already." Well, the tall one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he'd hoped and starts using a more threatening tone and moves very close to me, like 2 inches away. But I ignore him, staying focused on the scanner. I don't think he had showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little louder and says, "I see how it is. You probably only mess with doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you aren't. We could teach you a lesson." No, I'm not sure in what context he meant, but it definitely wasn't good. Still not looking at him, I turn away so my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I set on the scanner to grab my 4-inch pocket knife out and slide it up my jacket sleeve in case I need to protect myself, acting like I'm searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scanner worker standing at her podium and look at her with wide eyes, trying to communicate that I don't feel safe and I might need help. I turn back to the machine and slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me. The machine malfunctions and starts beeping. The lady worker comes over immediately, and the guy standing next to me changes their expressions from, "I'm playing the torture you for a couple of days and toss your body in a creek," to just "your friendly good old country boys making polite conversation over here." They actually tried to act like I knew them, and we were friends so the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker, saying I was stealing something and that's why the machine went off. The worker was definitely not buying it. She was a 6-foot-tall woman with some muscle on her, by the way. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. But anyway, she presses a few buttons on the screen, shooting the guys a very unimpressed look when they were trying to act charming, and cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. This machine seems to be not working correctly. Why don't you gather your things and I'll bring you up in an actual register?" She puts her hand on my back and gives me a wide-eyed look like I gave her a minute earlier, letting me know that she sees I'm in danger. I pick up my things to follow her to a register that is near the security office. The guys linger around the self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually complete their purchase, but stand at the exit, assuming they're waiting for me. I felt like I would be walking to my death if I made my exit in that moment. The worker keeps a close eye on the guys and scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me there really wasn't anything wrong with the machine I was using. It just misread my credit card. She said, "I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and then I saw them getting aggressive towards you. I already rang security to be ready to walk out to the parking lot and make sure you left safely when you were ready to leave. Then I saw you take that knife out and put it up your sleeve, getting ready to protect yourself. Good girl. As much as I'd like to see you show them that they picked the wrong chick to mess with, I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure you're safe. I see them waiting by the door for you. I'll just keep pressing buttons on the screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I both are still going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave." I thought to myself, this woman seriously deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over again and told her what they said to me, and I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of. As I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explain what was happening, and he obviously was very concerned and ready to come up there himself and kick some butt. A sweet sentiment indeed. By the time I hang up, the guys had given up and walked out to the parking lot. The worker said to give it another few minutes because she had a feeling that they may still be in the parking lot waiting for me to walk out and see which vehicle was mine so they could follow me. My instant thought was, no way, they got to be gone by now. I was wrong. The worker and security guard escorted me out, and as it was after midnight, you can imagine how empty the parking lot was. Towards the back of the lot, there sat an old, big pickup truck running with the lights on pointing toward the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to initially park like that, so I'm assuming they moved the truck to sit that way so they had full view of when I exited the store to go to my vehicle. It was like being stalked by very hungry lions when I unlocked my car and they saw that me, the worker, and the guard were looking directly at them, and I wasn't getting in my car until we watched them leave. They then peeled out of the parking lot. I mean, they seriously did a burnout and established that they were angry and trying to intimidate us or something. Poor creeps didn't get their way. Boo-hoo. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I am certain that they had just saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning on doing to me. I did write a long letter to the store manager and to their corporate location describing how their employees protected me and how grateful I was. I really hope that earned her a promotion, bonus, or raise. She didn't know me at all and was ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she went through with it anyway. This happened about 11 months ago when me and my wife got married in June. I'll never be so grateful that I have a habit of locking doors. Our wedding day was coming to an end. Family and friends were slowly starting to depart as me and my wife Diana took pictures and chatted with some of the guests who stayed a little longer and were just having a good time. It was a great day and a lot of fun memories were made. But what was least expected is what happened that night as we were on our way to our honeymoon. As me and Diana said goodbye to the last of the guests around 9 p.m., we got into the car and headed home. We had our bags packed prior to the wedding day for Cancun and were ready to go. I live in Washington and we were in a bit of a hurry because instead of flying out from Seattle Airport and SeaTac like normally people do, it was a lot cheaper for us to drive up north to Canada and fly out from a Canadian airport. Also, me and my wife thought it'd be fun to have a little road trip to Canada and then fly out from Canada to Cancun. Plus, it was only a 3.5-hour drive for us and cheaper, so we headed out around 12 a.m. midnight. We had a great time driving, blasting music, talking about Cancun, and just being excited about the new chapter in our life. Diana slowly started to fall asleep. Being exhausted from the wedding and whatnot, we were halfway to Canada. At this point, we were no longer in the city area, but more of a wooded area with fewer cars and fewer people the more we drove, practically seeing no one on the road. By that time, it was around 3 a.m. We had some extra time on our hands, and I was starting to fall asleep too, so I pulled over to a gas station to get some Red Bull to keep me awake. I pulled into the gas station that was completely empty and parked the car to see Diana asleep. I told her I'm taking the keys and locking her inside and then I'd be right back. Not sure if she could hear me, but she kind of motioned her hand around like people normally do when they're too tired to care. I came back around 6 minutes later to find my wife, shaking and crying. I was confused and freaking out a bit because I wasn't sure why she was crying. She couldn't even get words out at first. Later, when she calmed down, she told me this. Apparently, she did hear me when I told her that I'd take the keys and be right back, and as she was sleeping, she was awoken by a tapping on the driver's side window. Being too tired to get up or even open her eyes, she lazily went for the unlock button in the passenger side of the door. As she was going for it, she froze. A thought passed her mind, and then she remembered. Didn't he say he had the keys? Why would he need me to unlock the door for him? That's when she heard a woman's voice mumbling from the driver's side. She turned herself around to look at the window and saw a woman, long black hair with wide eyes and a crooked smile on her face. She couldn't hear what she was saying at first, but when she heard what she was saying, she kept repeating in a mumbled tone. "Are you tired? Are you tired? Are you tired?" Over and over and over again. "Are you tired?" She freaked out and told the woman to leave her alone. The woman laughed and told my wife that she was tired too. The woman never took her eyes off of her and tried the door handle. At this point, my wife was close to tears and attempted to call me, but as she did, she heard what sounded like a phone buzz and realized I left my phone in the car. Out of options, my wife started to honk the horn, trying to scare off the women while also maybe getting my attention. The woman still had her gaze on her and started mumbling more while laughing and trying the door handle again. Then she mentioned something about someone named Sarah and asked my wife if she knew her. After a few more minutes of mumbling, she left. To my wife's words, the minute she left, I came out of the gas station, so my wife broke down. I don't know how I didn't hear the honking of the car, and I still feel bad for leaving my phone in the car. My wife also added that one of the creepier things about that woman is that she didn't look homeless or dirty or anything. In fact, she seemed normal and well-kempt. My wife said that she'll never forget the woman's wide eyes and the gaze that she had on her with that smile. It also chose me to think what would have happened if my wife never realized that I had the keys, or if she'd never heard me talking about locking her inside and open the door while facing the other way. I don't know what those women's intentions were, but if I couldn't hear the knock of a horn, I'm not sure if I'd hear screams. This happened when I was 14, well over 10 years ago at this point. I grew up in a mid-sized town with quite a few suburbs and industrial areas kind of mashed together. The downtown was nothing special except for an overabundance of coffee shops and some historic buildings. I went out alone a lot after school because I liked having independence, avoiding being home and listening to music. I typically left my house before my mom got home close to 5 p.m. and was back before dark, which, depending on the season, was any time between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. I had a cell phone, a flip phone at that time, so my mom felt safe letting me go out alone as I could call her anytime. For most of my time as a 14-year-old, I would go to the same coffee shop, getting something filled with sugar and caffeine, and try to draw or write while listening to music. I went there so often that they knew my order and the approximate time I would come in. I was also the token goth kid around town, and I looked older than I was, the curse of developing early, so I guess I was easy to remember. One day I was sitting my usual spotted-it table by the window trying to draw. I'm not very good at an artist, and I can see some guy staring at me from the booth, facing my table on my left. I'm pretty used to this feeling, so I just continue drawing. A little while later, the man comes up to me and asks to borrow my pencil. I smile and give him one of mine and just go back to what I'm doing. Shortly after that, he comes up again and asks if he can talk to me, and then wants me to join him at his booth. At this point in my life, I had already been approached by a man who typically backed off once they learned my age. I also was terrified of making a grown man angry, because in my mind, it was better to pacify someone than to provoke them. I figured an angry man might be more prone to hurt me. So I acquiesced and sat at his booth with him. He slid into the booth beside me, which was uncomfortable, but he hadn't made physical contact with me. He gets to talking and tells me that he's so nervous talking to women and that I'm the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. I try to take compliments quietly and laugh them off, waiting for my opening to tactfully tell him that I'm basically a child. I ask him what he does for a living and how old he is. He responds that he's in construction and he's 21 years old. Then he asks me what I do. I say, well, I'm still in high school because I'm 14. He's taken aback by this just a little bit, and I can see it on his face. Mentally, I'm preparing to make my exit because now that he knows I'm a minor, I can get out of this. Well, I was wrong. He doubles down on telling me that I'm the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. Then he proceeds to tell me that he remembers every outfit I've worn since he first saw me 2 months ago. Since I go out almost every day, it's a lot of outfits. And he describes them to me and tells me what his favorite outfit of mine is. I take the same route to the coffee shop from my house every day, so he must hang out somewhere along there. Did he follow me to the coffee shop? Has he been stalking me? At this point, I'm freaking out on the inside, but I'm trying to keep my cool until I can figure out the way to gracefully exit the situation. We make small talk. I'm still scrambling for a way out, and I try to distance myself from him in the booth. He puts his arm around my shoulders, and a few moments later says, I keep forgetting you're 14. I can feel myself tense up at this point. I try to stammer through something and laugh it off. I notice that it's getting dark out and say, oh, well, I really need to get home. My mom will be worried about me. Trying to play it up that I'm still pretty much a kid. He resists and says that I should come to the park with him and his friend. The park is on my way home, so I tell him that I can walk past it, but I should really get home. His friend was already at the coffee shop, unbeknownst to me, but sitting further away, so he introduces us and we all leave. I don't really remember the walk to the park, but when we get there, he vehemently tries to convince me to walk down the hill into the now very dark park with himself and his friend, 2 adult men. I tell him that I really have to get home, that I have school in the morning, and that I'm sure we'll run into each other again. I finally make my exits and begin feeling some relief. I may be a block away from the park when his friend comes chasing after me and tells me that they have coupons for tacos and goes on about how much his friend likes me and wants to take me out. I'm kind of incredulous at this point. He's trying to impress me with taco coupons. I tell him no, that I'm a kid and that I have school. Luckily, the friend backs off and I safely make it home. I start changing up my route and didn't go to that coffee shop for a while after that. I run into the guy and his friend separately a couple of times after that. The guy himself pulled up to me in a minivan a few months after the incident and offered me a ride home. Luckily, I was pretty close to my house and managed to negotiate my way out of it. And his friend struck up unrelated conversations with me in the library almost a year later. I'm an adult now, and that was far from my last encounter with adult men that didn't care that I was a minor. The creepy guy who wanted to hook up with 14-year-old me, I hope you never meet another minor that you try to impress with free tacos. This happened when I was 15, over a decade ago. Boy, I'm starting to feel old. I've told this particular story to friends for years, but I've never posted it online. There were a lot of long stretches of industrial area in the town that I grew up in. Large plazas with big parking lots stuck next to one another and wide open stretches of road and highway. The majority of my town felt like the area before an airport, flat, gray, and functional. As a depressed teenager, I used to go out after school a lot by myself. First, it was within my neighborhood, but it escalated to me leaving the quaint residential areas to walk an hour or two in any direction. I'd usually make my way home before dark, and I had a trusty flip phone at the time to call my parents if I needed to. Generally, I felt pretty safe walking on the main streets because of how populated they were. There were always plenty of cars on the road, and there were quite a few pedestrians out and about. One early summer evening at about dusk, I was making my way home from one of my walks. It was a route I'd taken a lot, and I was about a 40-minute walk from home. I was just passing a parking lot when a car pulled out in front of me. I stopped about 2 feet from the vehicle to let it turn onto the road, but the driver rolled down his window. "Hey, how are you?" he asked me. The man looked to be in his late 40s and greeted me with an unsettling enthusiasm. I wasn't sure how to respond, but since I couldn't pass his car, I hoped he just needed directions or something. I'm okay. How are you?" Before I can even finish my response, he says, "I love your style. Goth girls in boots are one of my fetishes." And I'm not paraphrasing. Now, as I said, I'd been approached quite a few times by creepy men, but this guy was beyond bold. I had absolutely no idea how to respond. Just as I was going to try to formulate a response, a car pulled up behind him, meaning that he was blocking another car from exiting the parking lot. There's a car behind you trying to get out," I tell him, relieved that I now have a way to get out of this conversation. "I'll meet you in the next parking lot," he exclaims, and as I try to tell him now that I need to get home, he drives off. In my mind, there was no way he could be serious. I continued walking, but sure enough, he's in the next parking lot. The parking lot he'd entered was down a bit of a hill, and he was standing beside his car. As soon as he saw me, he started waving me down. I'd been followed by cars before, and I was generally afraid of the idea of making a man angry and being stalked to my home. I assessed the situation. He was parked about 10 feet from a dive bar, and there were about 15 men outside on the patio, which meant that they could see me and would be in the potential earshot if I screamed. I weighed the options between going down to meet him versus potentially being followed home and made this stupid decision to walk down the slight incline. I honestly don't know why I didn't just pretend to be on the phone or call my mom. I don't remember what he said when I approached, but I kept my distance from him in his car so I wouldn't be easy to kidnap. He walked around to his trunk, and I felt myself tense up and take a step back. He then pulls out a pair of women's boots and approaches me slightly to show them to me. They were laced up, about mid-calf, maybe size 9. "Nice, aren't they?" he asked me. Yeah, I responded hesitantly. They were not nice, but my brain was on autopilot. Want to try 'em on for me? Yeah, screening. I'm absolutely stunned. More than scared, I'm completely baffled that this is actually happening. I think I'm a little too young for you. I managed to stammer out. No. You're what, like 20? I'm 15. All the blood leaves his face, and he finally realizes that he's made a mistake. He quickly puts the boots back in his trunk and says something to the effect of, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You're just so hot. I should have been saying that. You're 15. I kind of laugh him off and exit gracefully. He drives out of there well above the speed limit. I'm relieved, but left absolutely bewildered and creeped out. Why was he carrying around a pair of women's boots? How many women did he approach? What just happened? What would have happened if I was over 18? Why did his brain think that what he just did was okay, even if I had been old enough? I still can't wrap my head around everything that happened. And if he thought that it would actually work, even if I was an adult, I'm in my late 20s now, which means that if he approached me today, he probably would be more insistent.